Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Vegas. My name is Dottie Tosan. I'm a senior account manager with Amazon Web Services. Specifically, I work with the startup division. So my sweet spot is early stage startups building on AWS. I'm also excited about today's presentation because we're going to be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart: increasing supply diversity. I have with me here today two wonderful founders who I'd like to call my family members, Rayford and Basil. They are with Scaleup. They'll be talking with us here about what Scaleup is doing to solve this challenge. Without further ado, I want to call on my brother, Rayford, and Basil to come on stage, introduce themselves, and go through their presentation.
Appreciate it, Dottie. Good afternoon, everybody. See if I get my slides right here. I'm not Dottie. I'm Rayford Davis. I'm the CEO of Scaleup. I have the pleasure of speaking with you today about how do we leverage technology to really drive commercial equity through supplier diversity. Just by way of background, before I started Scaleup, I was actually working at Amazon. I worked in AWS leading the digital innovation team across the southeast region of the US. Now before that, I led digital business efforts in startups, in large corporations, and even in higher education. In addition to that work, I've worked in education and economic equity. And I am one who believes that entrepreneurship with a social impact truly has the opportunity to change the world. I look forward to talking with you more about that. But before I do, I want to introduce you to our head of technology, Basil Udaudu.
Hey, everybody. My name is Basil Udaudu, and I'm head of technology at Scaleup. I've spent over 15 years in the technology industry working with companies large and small to build software solutions to solve their most critical business needs. It is a pleasure for me to work with Rayford at Scaleup because it allows me to combine two of my biggest passions: software architecture and working with diverse small businesses. Now I'm going to hand it back over to Rayford so he can tell you a little bit more about what the mission is.
Thank you, Basil. So the conversation for today, we're not going to start with supplier diversity. We're actually going to start with the problem. And the problem that supplier diversity really tries to solve is a gap. It's a gap around the wealth gap. But then we'll talk about how we can leverage commerce and entrepreneurship to actually close that gap. As we do that, we'll talk about how we'll then leverage technology to scale the solution such that that gap can be widespread and have a worldwide impact. Finally, we'll close by letting you know how you can get involved, and also highlighting how Amazon is leading in supplier diversity as well. That said, let's start with the gap. Don't know if you know this, but in the US, there is a wide and persistent racial wealth gap. Depending on which statistics you look at, anywhere from 8 times to 10 times difference between the average black family and the average white family in this country. Now, there are lots of reasons in history of why that gap exists and why it's persistent. We'll leave that for another conversation, but the fact is that exists. And not only does it exist, but it impacts the quality of life of those who are on the lower end of that spectrum. When we talk about quality of life, we mean access to good health care. We mean education opportunities, employment opportunities, and also housing, all the key factors of the quality of life of these populations. Now, the interesting thing, while we want to talk about closing the wealth gap, in closing the wealth gap, it doesn't just benefit those that are at the lower end of that gap. Closing the wealth gap benefits everyone. Here's some research from McKinsey & Company that showed that if we were to be able to close the wealth gap over a 10-year period, that would be worth $1 to $1.5 trillion of increased commerce and investment to the US GDP. That doesn't just benefit those who are at the bottom of that gap. That benefits everyone. Now, One of the ways to close this gap is through entrepreneurship and scaling entrepreneurship. As a matter of fact, as a couple of data points, it has been shown that particularly for black populations, that the median net worth of black business owners is 12 times higher than that for black non-business owners. Through business ownership and scaling that, we would be closing the wealth gap. In addition to that, 2/3 of black-owned businesses hire predominantly black employees. So it would be closing the wealth gap by increasing employment and reducing unemployment. Now, for those who may think that, is that preferential? Are those employers preferring black employees to not? That's not the case. They're just hiring in their networks, quite frankly, as we all do. In a previous life, I was a consultant, and you had to be a part of the recruiting team, not just to be one of the consultants. And so which recruiting team did I sign up for? My alma mater, right? We all recruit in our networks. And so in doing so, that is where scaling these diverse-owned businesses would actually increase the employment for these populations as well. However, I just talked about scaling, and scaling has been a challenge for diverse-owned businesses. I have on the screen a few of the reasons why. Number one is something that I mentioned before, the personal wealth gap. So one of the main opportunities, one of the main resources that's used to scale a business is the founder's own personal wealth, because that personal wealth also provides access to additional wealth. Additionally, it is documented there's been systemic bias in growth capital investments, particularly as it comes to bank lending. Third, there's an underrepresentation of commercial decision makers in the networks that many of these business founders exist. And then last is just the law of numbers. Businesses have a typical failure rate, but given the small population of diverse-owned businesses, when you apply that failure rate, you get a lot smaller number of businesses that actually get to scale. Now, these factors have played out over our society. And when I was working in Amazon 3 years ago, the CEO of Amazon lifted that. As you all know, about 3 years ago, there was a lot of social unrest in this country, and every CEO was speaking to it. And I was very inspired to hear Andy Jassy, the CEO of AWS, speak to it at reInvent just 3 years ago.
The reality is, for the last several hundred years, the way we treated black people in this country is disgraceful and something that has to change. We're working on it at Amazon. I know a lot of companies are, but I think the important thing for us all to realize is that this does not get solved in a few months. It can't be something that we work on for a few months and then turn our attention elsewhere. It's going to take several years of us working together, but we need to do it.
For those of you that were recording that, it's actually on YouTube. I can share the link with you, at the end of this talk. But I was very inspired, to hear that. And at that same time, I was wondering to myself, Rayford, what could you be doing, right? What type of social entrepreneurship could you engage in at this stage in your career to make an impact and a difference? And for me, it was about leveraging the resources available, to me to help scale entrepreneurship. There's a number of efforts to help start new businesses for diverse founders, and that's good and that's needed, and we need more of them. But we saw very, very little to actually help those that started the businesses scale them. So I was able to pull together a team that included Brandy Nellums and Cliff Goins onto a team at Amazon. And Amazon funded this project. The project was focused on scaling diverse-owned businesses, actually scaling black-owned businesses, to be very specific, at that time. And Amazon enthusiastically got behind this effort and supported this work. As we got into this work, we did what any entrepreneur does, right? You do a little bit of thinking, but then you get to the, kind of the brass tacks. And so we identified 9 Black-owned businesses that had revenues anywhere from $2 to $25 million annual revenue to figure out how we could scale these businesses. What could we do in working with them to help them scale? Well, we were looking to help them get big chunks of revenue. And those are going to come from big enterprise customers. As we looked at their potential enterprise customers, there was a function that was actually already identified to help their customers identify them. That role is called supplier diversity. So I want to pause for a second and just talk about the history of supplier diversity and why these functions exist. So the supplier diversity movement actually started back in the 50s and 60s as a part of the civil rights movement to bring equity through commerce and entrepreneurship. AT&T, General Motors, and IBM were some of the first to establish their corporate supplier diversity programs. Additionally, President Nixon and President Carter also instituted executive orders and signed legislation to ensure that in the public sector that supplier diversity and opportunity for these businesses would be lifted to the forefront that hadn't been up until this point. So for those that are wondering what actual supplier diversity means, right, are those businesses that are at least 51% owned and operated by groups and individuals that have typically been underrepresented or underserved. The categories that you see on the screen here are those that most Fortune 500 corporations will identify as diverse-owned suppliers with whom their supplier diversity leaders target. Now, as I mentioned, 3 years ago when Andy Jassy made those statements at reInvent, a lot of companies were making statements about how much they wanted to increase spending to Black-owned and diverse-owned businesses. They were doing that by looking at their spending and trying to figure out what percent of their spending they wanted to go to diverse-owned businesses, a very top-down analysis. Well, when we analyzed kind of those commitments, and we expand that across the Fortune 1000 and large government procurement organizations, we see that what they spent last year versus what they are targeting to spend in 2025 leaves a $300 billion gap. That's a huge gap. So the supplier diversity teams will spend their time trying to identify suppliers where their corporations can spend money to actually meet those targets that they set out. Here's the challenge. Large corporations, procurement organizations, are set up to do business with other large organizations. And the challenge is when you look at diverse-owned businesses, there aren't enough diverse-owned businesses out there to actually meet that target. Here's an example. Today in this country, there are less than 100 Black-owned businesses that generate $100 million in revenue. Now, I'm excluding an athlete that has a big contract and may put that contract under an LLC or may have a licensing deal or something like that. I mean operating companies, right, that have, kind of employees and organizations and that kind of thing. Less than 100 Black-owned businesses do $100 million in revenue. For perspective, that is 0.6% of all such businesses in this country. You will see very similar and comparable statistics for other categories of diversity as well. Now, the corporations realize this, and they're working really hard to provide programs to support these businesses and help them get to scale, right? So to help drive revenue, they'll actually make introductions across the large corporations that are big labyrinths, kind of for these diverse-owned suppliers to navigate. From a financing standpoint, they'll sometimes offer better payment terms, something a lot better than the typical 90-day or even 120-day payments to help them with their cash flow. And third, from a knowledge standpoint, they'll often assign an internal executive to be a mentor and help that business kind of navigate the enterprise, or even sponsor them to go to a third-party training program. Here's the challenge. That is helpful, but that's not sufficient, right? To actually reach scale, what those businesses need are new enterprise customers. They need multiple to really get to and beyond the $100 million mark. From a financing standpoint, it can't just be the cash flow benefit. They actually need institutional debt and or equity capital as they scale that business. And then last, they need capacity. They need people in other entities who can actually champion their efforts with their strategic networks and solutions that build capacity in those organizations. While we were doing this work inside of Amazon on this project, this is where we saw a gap, and this is where we saw an opportunity for innovation. This is where innovation and technology can close the market gap. Now, when we really think about closing the gap and making a change across the world, we need to have a really big goal. Really big goal leads to big innovation. So if we start with the less than 100 businesses that do $100 million in annual revenue, we said, what if we 10x that number? If we can 10x that number and get to over 1,000, that's a big growth that then requires innovation. Because to get to that 1,000, all of the companies that we touch won't make it. We're going to have to touch tens of thousands of companies. And while you could do that with arms and legs and people, it gets really expensive and really inefficient. And this is where technology can be really valuable. Additionally, as you start an effort, you need to be very targeted. So we said we want to target those businesses that we said are ready to scale, right? When you start a new effort, you really are looking for where you can get a high yield, where you can get a high conversion of those businesses that you touch, getting to the goal. And so we said, number one, what does ready to scale mean? The companies actually have to want to get to $100 million in revenue. Not every small business wants to get there, and that's fine. But for our purposes, we wanted those businesses that wanted to get to scale. Two, they already had at least one enterprise customer. We were looking for businesses that weren't trying to figure out how to deliver for an enterprise, but that had already figured it out, but they just needed to scale to other enterprises. So these are businesses that were somewhere between $5 and $30 million in revenue. That's not a hard and fast number, but it's not a startup business, if you will. It's a business that's already there, but that's looking to scale. And then last, it's a business that already had a leadership team in place. So now, as we're inside of Amazon, we're doing this pilot, we started thinking about, kind of who in Amazon could help us from a technology perspective. So Amazon has a team called the AWS Envision Engineering Team, led by Don Sothert. And they provided technology resources and teams to actually work with us. And we did some prototyping of how we can connect the pilot businesses with other customers, institutional capital, and those that champion their capacity building. The innovation that we ended up with was developing a mechanism by which we can aggregate the vital scaling resources that each of these businesses will need as they scale, but not just aggregate them, but aggregate them in a way where we can proactively link them together for the long scaling journey. For the business growing from $10 million in revenue to $100 million in revenue, that's not going to happen overnight. Even if we can accelerate them, that's going to be a 5 to 10 year journey on an accelerated path. Additionally, every one of these businesses isn't the same. So they were going to need a unique combination of these resources to be able to get to scale as fast as possible. So in January of this year, we actually transitioned that project out of Amazon into an independently Black-owned tech startup. We did so with Amazon support. Amazon was our first customer and still a strategic partner, but we all agreed that we believed that we could grow faster in this structure, working with Amazon as opposed to for Amazon. And so we started the business Scaleup. That said, I want to bring back my colleague, Basil, to talk to you about Scaleup.
right. As Rafer just elaborated, those 3 C's, customers, capital, and champions, are critical to accelerating the growth of these high-potential, ready-to-scale diverse suppliers. Accessing these 3 C's has historically been a challenge for these diverse suppliers, and it requires a lot of time, money, and additionally, relationships that oftentimes these suppliers do not have. Let's talk about the suppliers that Scaleup is focused on and how those suppliers traditionally access new customers, capital, and champions. Let's use this diagram as a representation of the ecosystem that these diverse suppliers are working in. These small but very active points represent these diverse suppliers who have built amazing businesses that oftentimes reach $5 to $30 million in annual revenue. These businesses, if given unlimited time and resources, we believe most of them would probably reach that $100 million mark. Unfortunately, the time and investment necessary for them to access those 3 C's organically is oftentimes too much of a hurdle for thousands of these companies to overcome. For example, for accessing new customers, these companies really have to pound the pavement to get customers that are outside of their current network. They've got to go to trade shows. They've got to go to networking and marketing events. They have to send out mass marketing and even sometimes cold calling just to get an opportunity in front of an executive buyer with influence within their organization. Getting those types of opportunities without those being in your current network sometimes are near impossible for these companies. Accessing and navigating the capital markets can be just as difficult. Understanding the types of capital that they need to access that meets their business strategy, getting the access to the investors and the other capital providers that can provide them that capital, as well as successfully convincing those capital providers to work with those companies, is oftentimes a hurdle that is historically difficult for these diverse suppliers to overcome. And without an organic, robust network of executives within their industry